Hello, my name is Denise Scales, and I am a descendant of DeWitty. Today we have with us Debra Heard. She is the PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Chicago, specializing in Nubian archaeology and Egyptian history and language. Debra Heard was also the orator in the documentary Cleopatra. And so today, Deborah is going to continue with us with episode 2 on the topic of Cleopatra and her background specializing in Nubian archaeology and Egyptian history and language. The floor is yours, Deborah, and thank you for joining us today. I think her screen is frozen. Let's give her a minute to unfreeze. It's probably the weather or something. So
did I unfreeze?
yes, you did. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All
I'm sorry,
right.
it's my connection is bad. So
Uh-oh.
am I frozen again?
You were, but you're open again. Go ahead.
Okay. So as I was saying, the last time we were together, we were talking about the fascination with Cleopatra.
All right, you guys. She's frozen again.
All right, can you hear me now?
There you go.
Okay, I think I'll just turn the video off.
All right. Great.
So yeah, so going back to talking about the fascination that people have with Cleopatra, I think that we have of Cleopatra and the geography that's involved, because I really think that part of the fascination is the fact that this is the first time that there was a Macedonian Greek, and he came and conquered Egypt in 332 BC. So for the next 300 years, Egypt is under the governance of this line of people that come from Macedonia, which is became part of Greece. So I think that this allows Europe to interject itself into this ancient civilization. Cleopatra was an enigmatic figure because she just projected herself, or I don't say she projected herself, but different places where you find representations of her, she looks different. So on a Greek coin, she has a certain appearance. If you see her on an Egyptian monument, she has a certain appearance. There are coins that are found to the east, and she has a different appearance. So it's really, I think part of it is people kind of project their standard of beauty onto her because she was heralded as being this very beautiful woman. So you have all of these things coming together in this figure of this woman, Cleopatra the Seventh. She wasn't the first Cleopatra, she was the seventh Cleopatra. And a very dysfunctional family. I didn't get to see the Netflix documentary, but you can't talk about Cleopatra without talking about how she had to marry her brother, You had all of these incestuous relationships prior to Cleopatra. And I believe that part of the psychological mental instability is because of all that incest. People were killing each other that were related to each other. She ended up being involved in her brother's murder, and her sister, because her sister her father had her sister assassinated when he came back to reclaim his throne. So there's a lot of dysfunction within that family. And so you even have to question, why are people fighting to claim her? So I guess I'll open it up to a little bit of a discussion, because that's what we were doing last time and we ran out of time. But
Right.
Just to get some ideas or feedback or even questions from you all about this real fascination that people have with Cleopatra.
Well, I guess this is Delbert. I'll ask a question, because as you were talking, my thought was, this ancestral relationship. I mean, that's not new. I mean, that's been kind of consistent throughout time, right? Throughout history. And my thought about Cleopatra was a question. I wonder what the perspectives would be if we actually put her existence in a proper historical context, which is where you began with your opening remarks. In other words, we could talk about all the different histories and cultures that ruled Egypt and what their experiences were like. And if that was understood in an accurate historical context, I wonder, would that impact the perceptions of Cleopatra?
I think that part of Cleopatra's existence in the modern day is political as well. It's not just putting her in a historical context. People want to claim her for various reasons. But you're right, the Ptolemies came to power when Alexander came in. Egypt was being ruled was under Persian rule. So it was still foreigners governing Egypt. So, but the Ptolemies were a little bit different because they established themselves. I'll basically say they were colonizers, of course, but they created an internal colony. So Alexandria was this model city, on the port of the Mediterranean Sea. So they were drawing in not just other people from Greece, but people from all over the Mediterranean were coming in, and they created this city that is very much a Greek city. So they are excavating the ruins, and its design is very much along Greek lines, the way that the city is constructed. So they were creating their own form of a Greek kingdom within Egypt.
Right.
But you also have to think about, like I said, Alexandria was on the tip of the delta, so it's facing the Mediterranean Sea. It was not internal, it wasn't inside of Egypt. So even that shows that they were kind of maintaining their own kind of separate identity from the native Egyptian people. So there's that separation. But they were also very, I don't know if we're going to call it smart or
I think she's frozen again. We'll give her a minute to come back on.
am I still frozen?
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if I can log in on my iPad, and that might make it a little bit more stable. I'm going to keep talking while I do this, though. So they were they integrated themselves. So you see some of the Ptolemies on the sides of temples, Egyptian temples, but they
We'll just give her a minute to readjust her mics and her connections. There you go.
am I back? Okay, I am so sorry. I wonder if we can just pause and let me get on my iPad, because I think that would be a little bit more stable.
All right.
Can we do that?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Let me do that.
How are you, Joan? Oh, you got it.
You're muted.
I was saying all those wonderful things about you. I said, I'm fine. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Glad to be here.
Mm-hmm. So I guess we can take this time to, if you have any questions
Yeah.
when she comes back, we can also do that as well.
Do you remember where she left off the last time, or very briefly what she covered? So I don't want to ask her to repeat anything for you
Oh
guys.
my! So you know that's almost been a month ago, and
Okay.
we probably Delbert. He could probably tell you better than.
Well, she kind of began to talk about that now, because she talked then. She is still amazed with why people are so fascinated with Cleopatra. And as I was listening to her, my thought was she sees her from a historical context, right? So she understands that Cleopatra was in a time when there were, quote, non-indigenous, and that's the word I like to use now, non-indigenous Egyptians.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
And when you understand that context, I think that impacts your view.
Okay.
She also
Okay.
made, I think, another real powerful comment when she said it's so political now. And I think in that context, everybody wants to claim Egypt because it is kind of the cradle of civilization. So that's why the Greeks want to claim her. The Persians, well, I won't say her, with Egypt. So the Greeks want to claim Egypt, and it just so happens at that time Cleopatra was there.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Okay.
So actually the Romans want to claim Egypt also. And she mentioned the Persians. The Persians want to claim Egypt, right? And the point is, none of them are indigenous Egyptians.
Okay.
Got you. Wow, Delbert, you're better than Memorex. That was good. Yeah, so it makes me think, yeah, would love to explore that more. It sounds like it's kind of similar to Ethiopia in that the indigenous Ethiopians out in the rural areas are not given the acknowledgement that the more city ones, the urban ones, who came in with Arabs and so on.
Right.
We never seem to uphold indigenous people anywhere almost.
Exactly. I completely agree.
Wow.
I mean, look at America as an example.
Yeah.
We in America, we aren't real clear on who the indigenous people are. I mean, we assume it's Indians, but those are really not indigenous people. If you go back to indigenous, meaning the original occupants, then we got to identify who those were. That's why I really like that word now, indigenous, because that helps clarify things, except people will make assumptions, because that's what the Persians are doing now, kind of, even the Arabs. when they quote claim Egypt, they are assuming they are the indigenous people when they are not.
Well, so who are the indigenous of I guess North America? Is it? If not,
Again, you
if
got to
not
dig.
Indian.
You got to dig deep into the history, and if you go back to the indigenous people of mankind, they were Homo sapiens 300,000 years ago in Africa. So those were indigenous humans.
Oh, worldwide, yeah.
Yeah, so they started then, and then you go from their migration from 300,000 years ago when the Homo sapiens began to migrate out of Africa. Then that's how you answer the question, who were the indigenous people everywhere?
We were.
That's exactly right. So the indigenous people were the original people who were African Homo sapiens.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But
When I see the indigenous of Egypt, not indigenous, I should say, the more recent indigenous people, I don't know how to exactly say it.
right.
The Black people, mostly not in urban areas, and they have absolutely no resemblance to Arab looks.
Right.
You know, the looks that people just love. They kind of mix, kind of keen nose and lips and hair and so on. The original folks look nothing like that.
See, and you make a real good point there. See, it really gets complex because there were multiple Black African cultures that ruled Egypt.
Yeah.
So there are some Black Africans that ruled Egypt that technically weren't indigenous. So Nubians, as an example. So
Nubians, right?
Nubians also ruled Egypt, and they were Black.
Yes. Wow.
So that's what Deborah was saying, that there's so many more important people to discuss than Cleopatra. There were so many other queens, you know, and Cleopatra was not the main person that we should be focusing on.
That is so fascinating. Why? I'd love to hear her answer to why then.
That's where I think she was going if she could ever get back.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I never thought about that.
And I think she said basically, Deborah, is because everything happened during her time period and she was in power. And that's the only reason why she's even mentioned.
Right.
But you know, they were saying there's so many other queens.
Right. She was actually the last pharaoh. So she was the last pharaoh ruler of Egypt. After that, there were no more dynasties.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's the significance. And then obviously she ties into the Roman Empire, right?
Right.
And then that's the European story, right? Is the Roman Empire is, quote, the greatest empire. Obviously, that's debatable. But Cleopatra, this Cleopatra the Seventh, ties into the Roman Empire with Mark Antony and Julius Caesar.
Okay.
So my opinion is that explains the fascination with her because of our fascination with the Roman Empire.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Well, and didn't she marry into?
Yes.
Yeah, she married it because I watched a little bit of Jada Pinkett's Netflix piece. Right.
Yeah, so she married the Caesars, who were the lead, right, and Mark Antony, who were rulers of the Roman Empire.
And you know, she was just trying to survive.
Absolutely. She was trying to keep Egypt relevant because it was being invaded. That was the point. So the Romans at that time were the most recent conquerors.
Okay.
Colonizers. I guess Debra uses the term colonizers.
And if you watch the movie, she did it by any means necessary.
Absolutely.
She killed family members and sisters, and so she was something.
That's right.
It was survival.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeez. We think modern times are horrible.
Right.
You human beings are a mess. I'm glad you
Right. So,
did.
but I see a lot of people coming back and talking about if we don't start to love each other, then we're no longer going to exist.
Right.
You know, and so if we don't start focusing again on love and peace and trying to get along, we're all going to be gone here soon. So, yeah, so I thought that was interesting too. I hope Dr. I still want to call her a doctor. She's
Doctor.
PhD.
She's getting there. She's getting there.
Okay, I hope she's able to log back in.
Oh,
There
there
she
she
is.
is.
Hi.
Good. Hi. Good.
Welcome back.
We can't.
Well, she was
can't
back. Did
hear-
we lose her?
We
No, her
can't hear
microphone
you.
is off.
I'm sorry. I couldn't connect anywhere. And then I realized that my internet was down. That's the reason why I was going in and out.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we just was having a little discuss. Well, Delbert, you know, was leading us, leading the pack here, but we're glad you're back with us so you can finish off where you ended. Or if someone has a question for Deborah, we can start there if you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Joan, did you have a question? Turn your mic on.
Have you settled the question that you asked us? Why the fascination? And we had some discussion based on what you said last time, and Delbert's putting in his knowledge of this subject. So we
Yeah, I
said
guess that's where we were when you left.
when
we
you
were,
left,
we were
yeah.
trying
Okay.
to discuss the part about why there was a fascination with Cleopatra. And I just offered the opinion that I think the connection between Cleopatra particularly and the Roman Empire, because there is this fascination with world history, with the Roman Empire being at the center of it. That I think is debatable. But I think the fascination with Cleopatra is that she had this political and intimate relationship with leaders of the Roman Empire, and I think that's an element of our fascination with her.
Yeah. I mean, it's that kind of like soap opera
Yes,
story, but even with the Roman Empire, she was a problematic figure because she was an outsider and she was a woman, and both of those things were not highly regarded by the people that were the leaders of the Rome. Well, it was the Roman, they were a nation state before they conquered Egypt. And then Augustus, he was Octavian when he conquered Egypt, and then he made himself an emperor, and he became the first emperor, Augustus. But he didn't like Cleopatra or Mark Antony.
right.
Even though Mark Antony, a part of his distaste with Mark Antony was married to his sister, and he had a relationship with Cleopatra. So there were all these tangled. Well, I mean, like it really was a soap opera.
Right. So maybe you can explain to us kind of the evolution of Egypt and help us understand the different cultures and who ruled it originally and how it got colonized by different areas kind of throughout time.
Oh, wow. So you want me to do a long history here?
I think that helps us understand it a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, see, where I tend to start the history of Egypt before there is a Kemet or Nubia, because I think that part of how we all get antagonistic about who the ancient people were. Everybody's claiming they were this, they were that. And I think part of that is not really fully understanding that they were not one single people. They were people. So, and that's why I go back to 300,000 BC.
I like that.
300,000 BC is the earliest that we have of modern humans, and they're in Ethiopia. So the oldest DNA that unites all humanity comes out of Ethiopia. The oldest skeletal remains of a modern human is around 190,000 BC, also in Ethiopia. Now there's another one that's looks modern, like a modern human, in Jebel El Houd, which is in Morocco, about the same time, 300,000. So you're seeing early modern humans on the African continent, but they're not in Egypt. They're not in the Nile Valley. Why not? Because they haven't gotten there yet.
Right.
So the history of humans is a history of migrations. People migrate and they populate and they mix and they mingle. That's how you have so much genetic diversity on the African continent, because people have been moving around for over 300,000 years.
300,000.
You know, so then if you look at the geography, Egypt is the only place that's connected to another landmass on the African continent. So if people wanted to go out, they had to go that way. If they wanted to come in, they had to come that way. So it's that link also helps us understand that people were coming back and forth, you know, throughout history, but where were they settling? That's the question.
Mhm.
Climate changes. So as the climate changed, the area where there's the Sahara,
He's freezing again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, this is so interesting.
Isn't it?
Whew.
So, what about the first? What about the United States? Would you know what was the first human for United States? What did that look like?
Well, when we get back, we can answer that. That's good. Yeah, that you're talking about the migration. So
Yes.
yes, so there's several opinions on that.
Oh.
Do you know? Do you know, Deborah? Deborah, can you?
There's one opinion that Africans left about 100,000 years ago and came to America, but we'll let Deborah tell us that.
yeah, so there's a series of migrations out of Africa. So you have one of the earlier hominid groups called Homo erectus, so still walking upright, but not modern human. They left out at about 60,000 BC and start populating into to Asia and to parts of Syria, Palestine. So they started going out. But then the later human Homo sapiens went out. No, I'm sorry. 60,000 BC is when Homo sapiens went out to populate. So they went out in phases. So some of them went to the east, and then some of them started going towards the west. And those migrations towards the west is what eventually ends up coming, you know, towards the United States. But you have to understand that they're also, as they're moving, they're encountering other groups of people that aren't quite modern humans, and they're mixing with them.
Yeah.
So and one thing that they've just discovered doing all this ancient DNA testing is that all populations of people outside of Africa have either Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA, just a small amount, but there's none of that in the African population. So that shows that when Homo sapiens went out of Africa, they encountered these Neanderthals, but they encountered them outside of Africa. So still there's a lot of genetic mixing going on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But going back to the Green Sahara, so people are migrating northward into the area that had been desert. And so there's a huge lake. So Lake Chad, which still exists, but it's a very small lake. During that time of the Green Sahara, it was called, well, we call it now Mega Lake Chad. So it's so huge that you could stick like the state of Texas in Arizona inside that lake, and it would still have room. It was a massive lake. So people were moving because the animals were moving. You know, so if you're dependent upon the animals for food and sustenance, they're also migrating with the animals, because this area becomes a place where people can actually exist and live. About 6,000 BC, then the climate starts to get dry again. So the lake starts to shrink. The rainfall starts to decrease. And so the land starts to become arid again. So what you want to do now is move towards permanent water sources. So where is that? So you can either go east towards the Nile Valley, where the Nile River is, or you can move west to the Niger Basin. That's what people were doing. So when we get to around 6,000, 5,000 BC, when you start looking at who are the people that, you know, created these civilizations of ancient Egypt and the societies of ancient Nubia, it's these people that are moving back and forth across the landscape. They're migrating east and west, and they're also migrating north and south. People are still coming in through that Gaza Strip, but those people tend to stay towards the northern part of the Nile Valley. So as time goes on, the culture that becomes the pharaonic culture, that the culture that defines ancient Egypt, comes from the south. So that's the significant thing to remember. These people come together, they become a people due to the cultural unifying that comes from the south.
Did you say that was around 6,000 BC? Is that what you said?
Yes. So when the climate starts to change again and it starts becoming drier, that's around 6,000 BC. So the people they haven't totally had to leave the Sahara, but you start seeing that there's some dry phases coming. And so by 4,000, it's really, really becoming dry. And so people are starting to move to those permanent water sources.
Wow. Was there any? Yeah. Are you pausing for question or catching?
Yes, I was listening.
So, was there color prejudice going back so many thousands of years? Was there judgment based on appearance?
So the whole racial thing, that's modern.
That's
right.
Right.
If you look at if you look at what's in the Nile Valley today, there's a range of colors. You don't get 300,000 years of existence and everybody still look the same. You know, there's more genetic variation on the African continent than anywhere else, because humans have been there the longest. And that's the thing that really kind of irritates me when people want to say that the Egyptians weren't Black Africans. And I'm like, all Africans don't look the same. All Africans are not dark. All Africans don't have the same texture of hair, the same shape of nose. You can look at someone from East Africa, and if you want to be clear about it, if that's the mother and father of all of us, you know, an Ethiopian, and you look at somebody from the West Africa, you see the range, but it's like, but that's where we all came from. So we see the range of colors. What happens in Egypt is there is a stereotyping, and I don't mean like a racial stereotyping, but there's a convention or a shorthand, if you will, for who the people were. So you'll see an Egyptian male and he's a reddish brown. But I mean, don't we see reddish brown Black people? I mean, what we consider Black. If you in Africa, in the African American community, you would see a reddish brown man, you'd be like, oh, that's a brother.
Right.
You know, you see a dark chocolate. I call it dark chocolate because it's, you know, a very dark brown, portrays a Nubian. But that's a shorthand because all Nubians didn't look like that. and you can see on the Temple of Hui, he was the vizier for King Tut. There's a very famous scene of these Nubian princes all coming in, and one Nubian princess. They're making presentations because they're bringing their tribute to Egypt, and you see all these princes. So some of them ones in the front, they have on what you would consider typical Nubian attire. They have, you know, some of them have a feather in their hair, and they're wearing the diamond belt, and they're bowing down, and they're dark. But then you see some other princes behind them, and they're wearing Egyptian clothes, but they're still Nubians, but they're portrayed in all different shades of brown. And that's the one that's significant to me, because it's like they understood that there's no one way. And that's what we need to understand. Not just us. I think we understand that. Other people that want to argue about Egypt has no relationship to Africa, they need to understand there's no one way to be African. There's no one look that's African.
Yeah.
It's a way to be dismissive, to characterize all Africans in one way. You know, even Du Bois made that argument back in the 1920s. He was like, oh, you say that one drop in this country makes us black. And so you could have a man that for all intents and purposes looks white, but if he has one drop of black blood, he's black. But then by the same argument, you go to Africa and you say that, oh no, this one's not Negroid, this was not a Negro, this was not a Negro. So you find the darkest one with the curliest, tightest hair to say that one's a Negro. You know, so you define a Negro as a very small population on the African continent. But anybody in the United States has got one drop of black blood is a Negro. So make up your mind. So that was basically Du Bois's argument, you know.
Yeah, I think we talked about that a little bit earlier. We thought one of the best examples for that, sometimes not so coincidental, but sometimes deliberate confusion, when you look at the Moors. It's interesting how there's a discussion, well, were the Moors black? And as you look throughout history, usually you will find people that refer to the Moors as black using that name Moor. Then if they tried to, distort their nationality and want to say the Moors are white, they would start calling them Muslims. So when they want to say Moors were white, they would emphasize that they were Muslim. And the truth is, the Moors were Muslim, but they were also black Africans. So that throughout history, I think, and you still find that today, and you do your research. Some researchers will really focus heavily on Moor, and then other aspects will focus on Muslim. And I found those that focus on Muslim tend to infer, if not outright claim, Moors were white.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of that in you know, Egyptian and just African history altogether.
Yes.
And I think that's part of the problem also, is that and that's one of the arguments that I've made, is that when Egyptologists came in and they're developing the discipline of Egyptology, you know, in the late 1800s or early 1900s, there was this concerted effort to remove Egypt from Africa. And we know this. But then African studies comes along. And I don't even want to say African studies, because let me say this, because the very first Africanist in this country was William Leo Hansberry, who started teaching African studies at Howard University 1922-23 academic school year. So that means that African studies has been taught in this country for 100 years. At the end of this school year, starting with William Leo Hansberry at Howard, but he's not recognized as the first Africanist. Melville Herskovitz at Northwestern is recognized as the first Africanist. So, and they made a very concerted effort to keep.
Oh, we're gone again.
Yeah.
She'll be back.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to ask her how was Greece the big influence on Rome? Yes, but when she says that Rome, I'm not good on early history and so on. So this is even way before medieval history. But are the scholars recognizing Egypt? Because I hear all the time about Greece and then Rome. So who acknowledged Egypt? Like, did the Greeks acknowledge Egypt? Just came in time for that question. If you don't mind, we know now that Egypt was the cradle of, not just Egypt, a lot of Africa, the cradle of education, civilization, and all kinds of good things. Did the Romans acknowledge Egypt's contributions, or did they just go back as far as Greece? And did Greece recognize Egypt?
So one of the things that I didn't bring up is that one of the contributions that the Macedonian Greeks did make was Ptolemy the First. He created the Library of Alexandria. So that started under him. And so he brought together basically anything that had been written anywhere, he tried to get a copy of. So he brought, of course, all of the people from Kemet, he recorded their knowledge. He sent out a collector to go throughout Greece to, collect anything that was written in, across the Greek islands to bring that back. And then because they were a port city, they also had this thing where if there was a ship coming through and you docked in Alexandria, then if you had any books or any kind of writings on board, you had to report that and they would copy it. So that became like this major center of knowledge. But of course, it was considered Greek. Ptolemy got the credit for that. Even though a lot of the knowledge, the original knowledge was taken from the different temples, but they did bring the scribes together. So some of the stories and stuff that we do have from ancient Kemet that survived is because there was this recording. So even though the library was destroyed, some of those stories got inscribed inside of temples that remain. But yeah, so the Greeks were hungry for knowledge. That's the reason why they were coming to Kemet. They were coming before the Ptolemies.
That's right.
Became, they were there studying at those temples with those priests to get that knowledge and then going back. So yeah, but of course, again, what gets elevated is the Library of Alexandria and not the temples across Kemet.
I found an interesting explanation in my study of the Age of Enlightenment, which was in the 16th century. In the Age of Enlightenment, someone said that's when the quote, black is bad and white is good first happened around the 16th century. And it was, at least in this one explanation, said that when the Greeks went into Kemet, they actually gave credit to the Kemites for their knowledge and their contribution to civilization. And then during the Age of Enlightenment, once they saw that, the Europeans said, well, we can't say that the blacks are inferior if you're giving them credit for the birth of civilization. So it was during the Age of Enlightenment where history was rewritten.
Right.
They discredited the Egyptians and gave all the credit to Greeks, when the truth of the matter is the Greeks actually credited the Kemites. It was the Europeans during the Age of Enlightenment, how's that for irony, where history was changed. So that is one story that you can find.
Yes, and in the Greek and Roman histories, you'll find that they speak very highly of the people, especially in Nubia. You know, the Nubians with the dark skin are considered to be noble people.
Right.
You know, so it's like, okay, they weren't considered evil, bad, or anything. They were noble.
Right.
Oh, look at that. So, oh my God, it's so fascinating. So that was the not coincidental. That happened around the beginning of slavery, the transatlantic slavery.
It begins when the Europeans start going exploring.
Right.
So when they first start exploring, they found these people to be exotic and interesting. But then when they start colonizing, that's where it comes in. It's like we're trading with them. They're cool.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, no, we don't want to trade. We want to dominate. We want to take. We don't want to deal with you anymore. So in order to do that, you don't treat your equal that way. You treat someone that's inferior to you. You're superior, they're inferior. You can dominate them. So in order to dominate them, you have to make them less than. So instead of being noble, you can't be noble anymore. You have to be evil, bad. You have no history. You have no culture. You have nothing. So now I'm justified in taking what you have.
Right.
And so that's the whole psychological process.
Yeah, yes.
But you're right. You do see that in the Enlightenment, and some of the great Kant, who is like the Immanuel Kant, who's supposed to be this great philosopher. He's one of the ones in his writing that starts talking about. You see that creep in about the black. He's stupid. Why would you ever believe anything he says? If you came upon him and he said he saw this, why would you believe him? Because he's stupid.
All right. With that, I think that's going to be another topic. Because we're running out of time. So maybe when you come back from Egypt, we can talk about I guess it would be the takeover when we became black and we became inferior to white. I think that would be a good place for us to start next time. So I just want to take this time to say thank you so much, Debra, for your information.
Just one little short thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Denise,
go ahead.
What separates anthropology from history? Are they really one and the same? Or, different specializations, but is the root history?
So disciplines developed, because during the Enlightenment, people were everything. A mathematician, a physicist, a historian, astronomer. But what distinguishes in the modern discipline is that history deals with text, the writings.
Oh, the writings. Okay.
Yes. And anthropologists study the cultures of actual people.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I knew the word, but you explained it so much about it coming from your mouth. I understand.
And then there's even the distinction between anthropology and sociology. So anthropology is moving.
Yeah.
But before, anthropology was you study people outside of the Western world.
Right.
And sociology was concerned with the West.
The West, yes. which I love. Thank you so much. Nothing more.
All right, Deborah, we just want to thank you for sharing your time with the descendants of the
Thank you, and I apologize for the internet interruption.
Well, we
Technology.
that's technology. So
Yeah.
you have a safe trip.
Have a safe.
Thank you.
And let us know when
Please,
you
my
come
sister.
back
Okay.
so we
Yes.
can do another series with you. If you
Yes. Yes.
All right. Well,
All
thank
right.
you all for
So
having me.
much. So much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Love you guys.
Love you. Oh, wonderful.